In this episode, I'm going to cover creating an GXT MVP4g project. I'll start off by generating the project, and then I'll import the project into Eclipse, and after that I'll start up and do debugging on the project, and also provide a project overview, a simple project overview. To get started, I'm going to go to the MVP4g Generator or initializer and cover what it does. So this is awesome because it's basically can create your project scaffolding from scratch, and it's so easy to get started here, and it's all due to this contributor. And let me show you who that is. So I'm going to click on the documentation link down here and bring it into a new tab. And this is an open source project, so I'm going to click on MVP4g2 and look at the commits. Now, this is something I always like to do, is just trawl the project and see what's going on. And you can see this. Frank Hosfield does an excellent job with keeping this project up to date. And he's an excellent maintainer of this project. So I would say, I always like to suggest and promote giving him a high five by going up here to the star. And when you click on the star, it's like saying, I'm going to be giving you a high five and saying thank you. So I'm high-fiving Frank and saying thank you for this project. And I suggest doing that, and you become a stargazer. I always love just saying, here's a high five. I can't say that enough. So I'm also watching the project. I think it's fun to see the improvements and cool things Frank's doing. So I'm going to go back to the documentation here. This is just a quick overview to show you where it's at. I'm going to cover these more in detail in the future episodes. So the generator documentation, which is going to be more pertinent to this tutorial, I'm going to click on that and open up in a new tab. And this is MVP for the project generator. And what's important here is the definitions to what the properties I'll be inserting in. And I'm going to select a GXT project for the widget set. You could select the other Elemento or native Quit widgets, application metadata and such, and how the screen metadata works. This is great because let me cover that more in a moment. So I'm going to go back to the generator. And I'm going to start off by creating my properties. So I'm going to put my domain in, gawk@, which is my examples domain for training. And I'm going to name mine mountains. And this is just going to be my sandbox project. And I'm going to display some mountains in the future. In a future episode, I'll combine this GWT project with an App Engine project to show you how you can have a client side and a server side in an enterprise-y web application model in a future episode. Okay, so then I'm going to select my GXT widgets, and this is going to be open source, the 4.0 version. I could select 4.03. So the application metadata, which I could generate different structures here, I'm just going to use all the defaults. And then the screen metadata, I'm going to use the defaults as well. So this will be great because there's a search, list, and detail. I could add another one. And by the way, if you've generated a project already and you want to add a view without all the headache, you could generate another project with the same properties and just simply add the views, and it will generate those as well. And then what I like to do is copy and paste cheat. I go to one project, copy and paste those views, and put them into another project. And I do that usually as a beginner in a structured framework most of the time because I think it saves me time. So I'm going to select generate, and to finish this, I'm going to click on download the project. And I'm not going to I could use GWT dev mode to create the project, import it, whatnot, or start up development mode and debug it. But in this case, it's a client side with the war configuration, so I can debug and use the launcher in Eclipse as well. So I'm going to close this and go to Eclipse. And what I want to do is import the project. But before I do that, I'm going to go to the Finder and double click on it so it extracts it. You may have to do that differently on your operating system. And so the next step, I'm going to import it, go on other projects. I have workspaces open. That's why I see other projects. I'm going to right click, import, and I'm going to type in Maven just to show you can narrow down what the options are here. Existing Maven project. And then I want to browse to my downloads folder, and that will be downloads, and select my mountains application, open. I can import it now. It's checked, finished, and it will import the project. Once I import the project, Eclipse is not satisfied with the configuration yet, so I'm going to right click on it and go Debug as Maven install, and that will build the project and initialize it and move all the bits around, like building the class path. Once it's done, the red X's will disappear. So I'm going to open up the PALM and explain a couple of important pieces in the PALM. In the PALM configuration, let's minimize you down to the bottom over here. Okay, so there's real important piece to this GWT Maven. We're using the GWT Maven plugin in this structure, in this application. So there's an important piece here. The packaging is set to GWT application. And that's telling my PALM packaging that this is a client-side module. Although, if you look down below, there is a WAR configuration, and let's look at that. So I'm looking at the Maven module, or I'm looking at the Maven plugin, and this Maven plugin has a WAR configuration. So its launcher directory, when run development mode or GWT development mode or super development mode, it will copy the bits into the WAR directory. Well, if I had another module in the target or another module in this Maven project, I would point it at that directory. In this case, the WAR directory is located in the target directory, and that's Mountains 1.0 snapshot. And that is such. And then there is a plugin that says, okay, this is where those resources are. So if I were to run the WAR and build it, it will describe where these web app resources are located. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that it's a client-side module with some WAR capability. And in this case, so that means the WAR static resources, that's going to be on source main web app, because that's a Maven architectural standard or specification that says, okay, these are where my resources are. And when I build, I'm going to copy those resources into the build where everything's combined and debugged from. In this case, not always, because in the future episode, when I look at the WAR web app configuration, we'll talk about how we run in a server that's not the standard Jetty web app server and debug the web application, which I think is a little more enterprisey. But there's always multiple ways to attack the problem, but they always do come back to, here's where my resources are at, here's how I host it, here's what's running it. In this case, it's going to be the GWT Jetty or embedded Jetty server. Okay, so that you can see the compiling stopped. All the red has disappeared, so that's great. So the project is configured. So if I right click on it and go to GWT settings, I'm looking at, okay, so GWT, here's the general settings. I could use the SDK that's there. That's the module, Mountains, and web application. Here's source main web app. That's pointing to that directory where the static resources are. I can cancel that, and now I can run it. So let's run it, and we'll look for the, so I'm going to right click on Mountains and go debug as GWT development mode with Jetty. And once that starts up, I can move that. It'll provide a link, so let me move that up and wait for that link to show up. This does the initial compile of the static resources to the web app folder. And I'm going to double click on Mountains, and this loads up my application. Now this is the bare bones generated application. Voila, it has loaded my application, and here we go. I can switch to the different views. Okay, so that was awesome. I've got an application up and ready and running. And that's what I wanted to show, is how to generate the application and bootstrap and kick the tires quickly with this architecture. And okay, so I want to just explain some of the pieces in this application and project architecture, so you have a context where it's already, so I've covered the target directory where the web app resources land. So I've done that. So I'm going to minimize that directory. The PALM is the directions for the project, for the IDE, and tells how to build it, how to run and debug it, where the pieces are going to land. So that's great. So we have here the client or client-side resources, the classes for Java. This is where the magic really happens, I think. And let's look for the module, source main. That's, since it's in the new Maven module, it's in the module GWT XML folder. And in this case, this tells GWT where the public resources or the source path is. So the compiler understands, okay, here's where I got to go and compile these resources. So com gawk mountains and the client, that's going to be my entry point, the mountains. So if I click on that, I can look at the mountains entry point, and this is where the application is bootstrapped. And this is part of the MVP4g architecture. So it runs the application and does some of the generation magic in the background. I'm not going to cover all those tips in this episode or all those details in this episode. And then we have the application, and you can just, and I'll just scan over these little bits real quickly. So with the event bus, it just has some boilerplate. And what we're after, I'm going to go to the UI because we talked about, I showed there was a few views that were created, and one of them was search. So there's 3 parts to that view: the iSearch view, the presenter, and search view, where the widget is kind of created. So it abstracts some of the logic into the MVP architecture strategy. And I'm not going to cover that in this detail because I think we can cover a whole episode on how we can take advantage of that architecture type. But this is excellent to get going. You can see. So that concludes today on how to get the MVP4g application imported and debugged and generated. So thanks for watching today. Follow me for more tips on tricks on GXT, and I'll catch you later.